Baghdad on Wednesday, with testimony by Tariq Aziz, who served as Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister under Saddam. Here's a 40-minute portion, courtesy of Al Iraqiyya Television.
The court calls on witness Tariq Aziz. What did you say? No, I'm sorry. That's an issue for the court to evaluate and not for you. Sit down, please. Sit down. Would you state your name for the court? I'm a detainee. Yeah, of course you are. Please, sit down first. Your name is Tariq Aziz? Tariq Aziz Isa. Did you say Tariq Aziz? No, Tariq Aziz Isa. Your age? 70 years old. You're a detainee. Okay. The court called on you to come here and to present your testimony on behalf of the defendant Saddam Hussein. Would you please rise and put your hand on the holy book? I swear to give a truthful testimony and not to say anything but the truth. Please make your statement in defense of Saddam Hussein. Your Honor, I don't have anything to do with the events of the jail per se, the events that this court is dealing with. But as a government official for a long time, I know that the events of the jail is not separated from other events. It is a link in a long chain of events that took place in Iraq and that targeted us all. And I am one of those who were targeted. In the end of 1978, were you there in 78? Were you there during these events? No. At the end of 1978 and beginning of 1979, there were a number of assassination attempts and explosions targeting members of the party and of the government. On April 1st, 1980, I was a minister in charge of education, culture, and youth. And there was a Asian student conference that was organized at the invitation of Iraqi students, and President Saddam Hussein asked me to deliver the opening speech on his behalf. I went to the Mustawtiniya University, and I was a minister, member of the Revolution Leadership Council, member of the National Party. But despite that, I didn't have a security detail. I went there in my car, and I was accompanied by two other colleagues. There were only three of us. Where did you go? Well, we went to the University of Mustawtiniya, as I said. I came out of the car. I was welcomed by the National Association of Iraqi Students Chairman, Mr. Adab. And we went through the gate, the main gate of the university, and I heard a noise similar to that one would hear when the ring of a hand grenade is taken off. You know, there's that noise first, and then the grenade goes off. And when we heard that noise, my friend said, "We're hit." So he pushed me with some force, and then the grenade exploded. And then a second one, and then a third one. So I was targeted and I was hit in my back with shrapnel. However, my colleague lost an eye and the other one was injured, and thank God it didn't go. But I hate to interrupt you, but how would you tie the Mustansiriya events to the Dujil? I said at the outset that the Dujil events are a link in a whole chain of events targeting government officials. First of all, I was not in security and I had nothing to do with anything else but education and culture. So when they try to kill me and end up killing tens of students who were there at the gate. Your Honor, there was a large group of students who were welcoming me as they do welcome every government official. And there are 3 grenades that explode, killing tens of these students. 2 or 3 days afterwards, there was a funeral that was organized by for the victims, and the funeral procession was also targeted, which resulted in the death of other students. And then the Minister of Information was targeted. And as you know, later I was in my office and I was looking through my window to the Iraqi news agency, and there it blew. And there were victims, there were civil servants, there were civilians in great numbers. And then also there was an explosion at the Ministry of Planning. So I'm telling you about these events so that you have an articulate idea about the general circumstances. What happened is that the parties that were loyal to the Iranian regime, they conducted all these actions that targeted Iraqi officials, but in fact resulted in the death of innocent civilians. When they throw a grenade at Tariq Aziz, in fact they kill civilians. If they send 3, if they send 3 grenades and blow 3 grenades, then it's really a massacre. So as I said at the outset, this is a chain of events targeting officials and citizens. And you are here trying to hold trials for those who are accused of mass killings. But my question is, killing 10 people at that university, wasn't that mass killing? What this is, please don't ask questions and answer them at the same time. Please try to tie what you're talking about to the issue at hand. Well, I would like to talk to public opinion in Iraq, in the Arab world, and in the world that these mass killings, or so-called mass killings, we were the first victims of them at the end of the 70s and during the 80s. So if there is a justice that wants to hold to account people responsible for such actions, they need to bring the people who tried to kill me and tried to kill tens of students at the University of Mustansiriya. You are trying the president and his colleagues for events that took place in 1982. I was targeted in 1980. Why don't you hold those people responsible? You know, those who perpetrated these acts against the civilian institutions such as the Iraqi News Agency and the Ministry of Information. And those who perpetrated these acts, they openly claimed responsibility for them. And now they are in power. They are in government. If you try Sheikh Abdullah right here, who is a farmer, why don't you bring these people to trial? And they are very well known, and now they are members of parliament and ministers. Please don't go outside the scope of your testimony. We are here, we brought you here so that you give us your testimony in the Degil affair. Your Honor, I said that the Degil events, I have nothing to do with them, but I was an Iraqi, an official of the government and of the party. I was the target of an assassination attempt that was perpetrated by a political party that said plainly that it was targeting Tariq Aziz. Now, this party is calling for the trial of Iraqi officials who acted within the law. So, as a judge and as a prosecutor, you could file a suit against them. Please, we're not here to draw parallels. This is not the purpose of your presence here today. Please, you started with the Mustansiriya events. Would you please tie those events to the Degil affair? So, how would you tie that? Well, Your Honor, this is a political issue. This is not a technical issue. The Degil events, the assassination attempts that took place against the president in Degil is one episode and a number of others that targeted all the officials of the government and the party, and I am one of the victims of these events. No, what do you think about the arrests and the executions that followed the events of Degil? Well, I think the legal procedures were followed. In any country, the head of the state, even in Switzerland, the head of the state, if he is openly subjected to an assassination attempt, he is obligated by law to take the necessary measures to apprehend all those responsible for that action, and even those who were responsible for inciting others to take actions, and those who participated, and those who helped, and those who abated. We saw that on TV, but those who were shot called for the arrest of those who did the shooting and those who provided the ammunition and those who helped them in every way. So, and Mr. Awad, who is the chief judge of the Revolutionary Court, he told me, as you know, he's in prison with me, and as you well know, people when they're in prison, their real personality is revealed, and I think he's a tremendous fellow, is very altruistic, very kind, and very nice, and I doubt that he would try people with any vindictiveness. Something else regarding Mr. Barzan and Tahir. Now, we ask you to come here as a witness for Saddam Hussein. When the time comes to speak for those two others, we'll let you know. Well, Mr. Barzan Ibrahim is my personal friend. I am Vice Prime Minister, and he wasn't responsible for the intelligence. And he's my good friend. And we would meet occasionally for dinner, and he would tell me about what's happening in his job. And as Deputy Prime Minister, I would talk to him about things having to do with my job and responsibilities. But I never heard him anytime we met that he was arresting and detaining people, and he was torturing them. He would have told me that. But he could have told me, listen, for last week, the whole week last week, I was not able to get in touch with you and have lunch with you or meet with you because I was busy. And this confirms the notion that Mr. Barzan had nothing to do with it. But me, as an official, I've been a minister since 1974. I was Deputy Prime Minister, then I was Foreign Affairs Minister, and then again Deputy Prime Minister. I know that intelligence services have nothing to do with domestic affairs. Anything that happens, if this has to do with domestic affairs, even if the intelligence services are aware of it, they would give the file to the law enforcement. So, with regard to Degil, no Barzan and no one else in the intelligence services had to do with it. Well, however, as someone in charge of intelligence and the person responsible for the protection of the president, who happens to be his brother, he was concerned. So Mr. Barzan never really was in charge of the Degil file. So, and then Mr. Ramadan, as for Mr. Ramadan, he was a senior Deputy Prime Minister, and I was Deputy Prime Minister. He was a little higher than me, of course, but we would meet all the time, 3-4 times a week. We would talk, and we would have dinner together sometimes, but he never ever told me anything about Degil. He never told me, I'm sorry, haven't seen you for a week because I'm very busy dealing with the Degil file or the Degil situation. I never heard anything from him. Neither after a week after the events, nor a month after the events, nor a year after the events. Okay, what about the raising of the orchards? The raising or the orchards. What we heard is that those whose fields were raised, they were generously compensated, and they were given other lands, replacement lands, to farm and to live in. The president never mentioned that because he considered that to be his duty towards fellow Iraqis. And you can ask here people from Degil, they're right here present, and some of the witnesses who appeared before your court, Your Honor, you can ask them how much compensation they got from the government, how much land did the government give you. So when the government is obligated to raise orchards, and according to the Iraqi law, the land can expropriate land for the common good, what you call eminent domain, provided it gives a fair compensation. And if they got fair compensation, they don't have a case any longer. However, those who try to kill the president commit a crime, and they need to be punished for that. And his government actually tried to punish those who committed these acts, and this is absolutely normal, and there is nothing wrong with it. Everywhere in the world, such thing would be normal. And it's not because I like Saddam Hussein and he's a friend of mine, but I don't think he is responsible. I don't think actually he bears an iota of responsibility for what happened, neither him nor the rest of his colleagues. Well, I've been in prison for 3 years. I don't go out. I don't see Baghdad. But we hear that the road leading to the airport has also been raised, and the orchards surrounding it have been raised. Did they get compensation? Well, the reason they say they raised these orchards because they don't want the terrorists to use them. Well, it's the same thing that happened in the jail. They raised these orchards in order to preclude terrorists from using those lands and hiding behind those trees. However, the state compensated those owners of those farms and orchards. So he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't commit a mistake, either legal mistake or humanitarian mistake. Now, in Fallujah, in Ramadi, everywhere in Iraq, there are orchids being raised, and nobody compensated them, compensated the owners. So no one came to them and gave them a compensation. No. It's true that after raising the orchards here, compensated them for security reasons. Well, this is, Your Honor, you know the law. And I'm not a lawyer, but I understand the law. The state has the right to change the structure of ownership and to take any property belonging to the citizens, provided it compensates the citizen fairly. So, for example, somebody could come and say that the city of Baghdad raised my house. But the responsibles in the city council in Baghdad said, well, we did not just raise it, we built the hospital in its stead. And he was compensated fairly. That would be okay. Would you please direct your testimony to the court? Please look at the court when you talk. Do you have anything else to say? Yes. As a citizen and as a witness, I think that the court has the right to try former officials if they commit crimes. If they acted in violation of the law that was available at the time of the act. However, we cannot try people on the basis of a law that was not available during the time of the events. So I think it's important for us today, if you want to try these people, to also open a case for the events of the University of Al-Mustawtiniyya. Let me ask you a question. You are an intelligent person. Why did the government enact the expropriation law? Is it so that the government can do whatever it wants with people's law? Well, no, this law has been in Iraq, effective in Iraq, decades before the coming of Saddam Hussein to power. And I can tell you, the government, for the public good and for the public interest, you mean yes, but this law can be and should be implemented through the court and not through an administrative decree. Well, every law is valid during its time, which means during the Ba'ath era, which is an era I am very proud to belong to and to have belonged to, decisions that are taken by the Revolutionary Leadership Council are considered law. They are considered exactly like a law. This was the reality of that time. If the president of Iraq, who is the chairman of the Revolutionary Leadership Council, takes a decision, it becomes a decree, and therefore it becomes a law. You mean without returning and without referring to the law? Well, the eminent domain law was applied. Because after the events of the jail, there was a commission that was set up in order to go there and to see who incurred damage, and it prepared a report on the basis of that, and all the people who incurred undue damage, they were compensated. And I think one of the witnesses that you had a few days ago, who was a Baathist himself, he said that his farm was also razed. And so we were not targeting anybody in particular, but the eminent domain law was applied adequately. So your testimony here is not an eyewitness testimony. It is a speculative testimony. Isn't that right? Yes, it is. Well, Your Honor, I don't want to say anything outside what is reasonable, but in all the trials that took place in the world, including the Nuremberg trial, those who were officials in the country in question, whether they were themselves defendants or not, they would rely on members of the governments in order to enlighten the court. I've been member of the government since 1974 to 2003, so it is the right of the defendants here to invite people like me, also for the benefit of the court, to eliminate the court with regard to the issue at hand, and also to eliminate the public opinion in Iraq, in the Arab world, and in the rest of the world, within the limits of decorum. Of course, what I want to say also that I have been a victim of criminal acts that were perpetrated by a party that is now in power. Why don't you bring that party to court? You can ask him, why did you attempt to kill Tariq Aziz, and why did you kill those Iraqi students? And these are Iraqis. So to sum up what you said, out of vengeance, you wanted them to come here and be tried. No, it's not a matter of vengeance. President Saddam Hussein, when his convoy was targeted, his protection detail was made up of militaries. They didn't go out and start shooting. They referred the case to law enforcement in order to investigate and find out who was responsible. And then the file was moved to a court. So neither himself nor his security details, that was very, very well trained, go out and start shooting randomly. So, as head of state and also as a lawyer, you know, he's a jurist himself. He knows that these are the obligations of the security apparatus and not his own responsibility. So, he took the measures that are available to him under the Iraqi law. And I have to tell you that I came here on my own volition to give my testimony. I wanted to give my testimony in favor of President Saddam Hussein and in favor of Barzan, because I know he has nothing to do with this, and also personally to testify on behalf of Taha Hussein Ramadan. I know he has nothing to do with it. Well, as a deputy prime minister, I knew what the responsibilities of the intelligence director were. I knew the responsibilities of what everyone else in the government were. And I knew that there has been a lot of talk about the intelligence institutions was apprehending people and torturing them and detaining them, but that's not true. Mr. Taha Yassin Ramadan now. Okay, let me ask you a question in this regard. Well, you ended up really being the witness for those three defendants, although in the beginning we wanted you to give your testimony with regard to only one of them. But with regard to Mr. Taha Yassin Ramadan, well, Taha Yassin Ramadan has nothing to do with the Dugel affair at all, because the security security is the responsibility of the head of security, and he has nothing to do, and he's not answerable to the senior deputy prime minister. And what he was in charge of was the city planning like Dugel and like other cities too. So the fact that he wanted to plan city from an urban standpoint was not a crime, and some of the actions that were taken, give him water. He said he's 30. He said he's thirsty. He wanted water, so give him some water, please. Yes. Give them as much water as they need. So the truth is, Mr. Awad, I have a lot of respect for him. No, well, this is not what we're asking you about. We're talking about the three defendants here, not about the former president of the Revolutionary Court. Well, the president, I know exactly who he is. He was my president, my comrade for decades, before he even became head of the state. Now, with regard to Barzan, what do you have to say? Well, Barzan is a friend, and he's my brother. He was in charge of the intelligence, and he has nothing to do with the events of Dugel. Mr. Ramadan, he was senior vice prime minister. He has nothing to do with Dugel. He has nothing to do with the raising of orchards at all. As a deputy prime minister, I knew exactly who each one of them was responsible for. Therefore, I have a complaint to lodge either with you, or if you're not willing to take it, then I will have to ask God to help me out on this score. No, there's no need for that, sir. Please, hold on. We would be delighted to listen to your complaint with all due attention, but this is not the time for it. After this hearing, if you have anything to say, please let the court know about it, either personally or through your lawyer. As an Iraqi citizen, I was the subject of an assassination attempt that resulted in the death of others, and I incurred injuries, and I have shrapnel now in my back. Listen, now you were here in your capacity as a witness, but if you have a complaint, we said, you can either you personally or through your lawyer file the necessary papers before this court. If you have any questions, well, they don't know. The defense doesn't have anything to say. Mr. Prosecutor? Yes. A couple of questions. You mentioned that the defendant, Saddam, has nothing to do with the Dugel events, and that he took steps that comport with the law. Were you ever charged with supervision of anything having to do with Dujayl? Is this a question? The answer is no. No, my responsibilities are well known. Now, have you ever been to Dujayl after the events? No, I've never seen Dujayl. What is your relationship with intelligence? Well, I am an official in the government, and the intelligence is an institution of the government. Do they give you reports? No, no, they don't give me reports, regular reports. No. Well, the director of intelligence, Mr. Barzan, is a good friend of mine. We get together, we meet, we have dinner together. Sometimes he would be busy all day long. And if he were truly involved of the things you were talking about, he would come to me and tell me things about that. But he never did. But the intelligence director, at any rate, is responsible before the President of the United States, of Iraq. I myself, I was a minister in charge of culture and in charge of education. But in that capacity, I was aware of the specialty of each one of my colleagues. I knew very well what the responsibilities of each one were. So that means that you have your own field of specialty, which differs from the other ministers, right? And which means that the intelligence directorate would not tell you exactly what they're doing. But given your relationship with Mr. Barzan, it was not unlikely that he would share with you his point of view regarding some of the activities of his organization. Okay, that's clear. That's clear. I'd like to ask you a last question. Outside the scope of the Dujayl issue, because you yourself, you talked about a host of other things outside the Dujayl. Here you are a witness in a court of law. You are also a defendant in one of the other cases that are not up for examination yet. That means that you are a detainee right now. And of course, the defendant is innocent until proven guilty. Well, it's been 3 years now I've been detained. Well, I'm talking about 4 years. Suppose, for example, now, in your condition as a detainee and your family, which includes minors, are detained for 4 years. And you are talking about law. You were talking about law earlier. How would be your reaction to that? Well, you have to ask the director of security who would do this. No, I'm asking you. Well, let me tell you, in criminal cases, it is very well known that if a woman, for example, is detained for a criminal action, she can ask for a kid she is breastfeeding to be brought and stay with her. I saw that in Syria when I was detained. That means that sometimes it is possible that the family could request that the minors come and stay with them in the detention center. I think that detaining a minor who has nothing to do with the case is inhumane and illegal, in theory. However, if a man and a woman are detained and they have a 7-year-old kid, for example, it is possible that the mother can ask that her son be brought and stay with her at the detention center so that she can care for him and she could take care of him. So it's very possible that this may happen until the court renders the final decision. Well, as someone who was at the helm of power, well, I was not at the helm of power, but I was a high-ranking official. It is the president who was at the helm, not myself. During your tenure, as a government official, when you would hear that there is a court that rendered a decision to execute a minor, what's your reaction? Well, let me tell you, me and Mr. Awad, who was the president of the court, are in the same prison now. Well, I'm talking theoretically. If you hear something like that, what would you say? Well, I haven't followed these things, but what happens if you were to hear something like this? Well, I'm talking theoretically. In 1984, I was foreign minister. As you know, as foreign minister, I have a briefcase in my hands. I was traveling all the time. So I'm not totally aware of what was happening in the country. However, the former chief judge of that court, he told me, and he's in prison with me, that based on the documents that were presented to him, these were not minors. Well, what if it were true? Well, that would be wrong. Well, if it's true, that would be wrong. If it's wrong, that would be a vindictive charge that is completely unfair. Okay, but since you're not involved with the jail and you're not involved with anything and you don't have any responsibilities with the events, the prosecution will stop here and we leave it to the court.
That was a portion of Wednesday's testimony in the Saddam Hussein trial by Tariq Aziz, former Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister under Saddam. Our coverage was courtesy of Al Iraqiyya Television. The trial began in October 2005. It resumes on Monday with more testimony from defense witnesses.